I'm Danielle. I'm a beautiful 32 years old. And I need you to understand something before I go any further. I stood in a courtroom 3 months ago, looked across at my own sister holding my husband's arm, watched my mother nod in agreement beside her, and heard my father's voice boom from behind them. Danielle, stop being dramatic and take responsibility for this child. My sister Elise looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Pay up or step aside." My mother, my own mother, whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You've always been the stable one, Danielle. This is what family does." And I want you to know that in that moment, I felt something inside me shatter so completely that I could hear the pieces falling. Because the child they were demanding I support, the baby my sister was cradling in that courtroom, that baby was conceived while my husband was sleeping with her. In my home. While I was working 60-hour weeks to keep our lives stable. This story gets darker. Much darker. And if you think you've heard betrayal before, I promise you haven't heard it like this. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. Tap subscribe. I know, everyone asks. But here's the thing. If you don't want more stories like this, stories about women who were told to be quiet and finally found their voice, then don't subscribe. But at least tell me why in the comments. Tell me you think I deserved what happened. Tell me something. And while you're at it, let me know where in the US you're watching from. I want to know who's listening. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Let me take you back. Let me show you who I used to be because that person doesn't exist anymore, and I need you to understand why. I was the quiet one. Always have been. The achiever. The backbone. When my parents needed someone to co-sign for their house refinance, they called me. When my sister's car broke down at 2 in the morning, I was the one who drove an hour to get her. When my father needed help with his small business taxes, I spent weekends doing them for free. I was reliable. I was steady. I was the one who swallowed everything uncomfortable so everyone else could stay comfortable. My sister Elise? She was the opposite. Emotional, they called it. Sensitive. She cried when things got hard, and everyone rushed to make it better. She'd mess up at work and get fired, and my mother would stroke her hair and tell her the world was cruel. She'd get into screaming matches with boyfriends in public, and my father would shake his head and say, "She just feels things deeply." I used to think there was something beautiful about that, about being allowed to feel so much. I used to envy it actually, because I wasn't allowed that luxury. When I cried as a teenager after a breakup, my mother told me to pull yourself together, Danielle. Life doesn't stop for feelings. When I struggled in college, my father said, "Figure it out. You're smart enough." So I did. I figured it out. I pulled myself together. I became the person they needed me to be, strong, capable, emotionally controlled. I got my degree in finance. I built a career. I married Eric, who seemed kind and stable and safe. We bought a house. We talked about kids. Everything looked perfect from the outside. And my family loved Eric. God, they loved him. My mother would hug him longer than she hugged me at Sunday dinners. My father would clap him on the back and talk about sports and business. Elise would laugh at all his jokes, touch his arm when she talked to him, leaning close during conversations. And I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, insecure, ridiculous. Because that's what you do when you're the strong one, right? You don't make waves. You don't create problems where there aren't any. But there were problems. I just didn't want to see them. It started so subtly I almost missed it. Elise began spending more time at her house. She'd show up unannounced on weeknights, claiming she just needed to talk. She'd stay for dinner. She'd curl up on our couch like she lived there, and Eric would make her tea without asking, like he knew exactly how she took it. My mother encouraged this. "Your sister needs support right now, Danielle. She's going through a hard time." Elise was always going through a hard time. That was her permanent state of being. I'd come home from work exhausted, and they'd be on the couch together, watching a movie. Elise would have her feet tucked under her, comfortable, at home. Eric would have that soft expression on his face, the one I used to think was reserved for me. "Oh, Danny's home," Elise would say, like I was interrupting something. And I'd apologize. I'd actually apologize for coming home to my own house. There were small things. A perfume I didn't recognize on my bathroom counter. Late-night phone calls that Eric would take in another room. Private laughter that stopped when I entered. Once, I found a receipt for dinner at a restaurant downtown, a place Eric had told me he'd gone to with colleagues. But when I casually asked Elise about her week, she mentioned having the best pasta at that exact same restaurant on that exact same night. When I brought it up to Eric, he looked confused. Oh, yeah, Elise stopped by because she was in the area. It would have been rude not to invite her. As if that explained everything. As if that made it normal. My mother called me one afternoon and said, "You need to be less serious with Eric, sweetheart. Men need warmth. Elise told me you've been distant lately." That stopped me cold. Elise told you what?
She's worried about you.
She says you're working too much, that you're never home, that Eric seems lonely. And there it was, the beginning of the shift. The reframing. Suddenly, I was the problem. I was too serious. Too cold. Too focused on work. Never mind that I was working those hours to support our life, our mortgage, our future. Never mind that Eric hadn't worked a steady job in 8 months. Elise was warm. Elise was emotional. Elise was there. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, my family started looking at me differently. Like I was the difficult one. Like I was the one who needed to change. The betrayal drop happened on a Sunday. We were all at my parents' house for lunch, something we did every few weeks, this forced family gathering that I dreaded more and more. I was setting the table when Elise walked into the dining room, stopped in the center like she was about to give a performance, and said, "I have news." My mother looked up instantly, already smiling, like she knew what was coming. "I'm pregnant," Elise announced. The room exploded. My mother gasped and rushed to her, wrapping her in this tight, rehearsed-looking embrace. My father stood up, looking stern but pleased, nodding like this was expected, like this was good news. And Eric, my husband, stood up from the couch and walked over to Elise. He put his hand on her back. Gentle, protective, familiar. No one looked at me. I stood there holding a stack of plates, watching my family celebrate, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Because I knew. In that instant, with absolute certainty, I knew. "Who's the father?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. Elise turned to me slowly. Her eyes were bright, almost defiant. "Does it matter?" My mother jumped in quickly. "Danielle, this is a happy moment. Don't ruin it with negativity." My father crossed his arms. "Your sister needs support right now, not judgment." And Eric didn't say anything. He just kept his hand on Elise's back and wouldn't look at me. That night, I asked him directly, "Is it yours?" He sat on the edge of our bed, head in his hands. "It's complicated." Complicated? I felt something crack open inside me, something raw and furious.
Is it
yours? Elise was going through a really hard time, he said quietly. She needed someone. You were always working, Danielle. You were never here. And she understood me in a way. I didn't let him finish. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and drove for 2 hours with no destination. I called no one. I cried until my throat was raw. And then I went back home because I didn't know what else to do. The gaslighting started immediately after that. Elise told my mother that I had attacked her at lunch, that I was jealous and unstable. My mother called me crying, begging me to get help and to stop projecting your marriage problems onto your sister. My father sent me a long email about family loyalty and how I'd always been emotionally closed off, and how maybe I needed to look at my own behavior before judging others. Eric started telling people, our friends, our neighbors, that I was going through something, that I was stressed from work, that he was trying to be patient with me. And Elise? Elise moved into our guest room.
My mother suggested it.
She needs a safe place, Danielle. You have the space. And honestly, it might help you to reconnect. I said no. I said absolutely not. But Eric looked at me with these wounded eyes and said, it's temporary. She's scared and alone. Can't you just be kind? So she moved into my house, pregnant with my husband's child. and I was expected to act like everything was normal. I'd come home and find them cooking together in my kitchen. I'd hear them laughing through the walls at night. I'd see the way he looked at her, soft and attentive and present in a way he hadn't looked at me in years. My mother would visit and coo over Elise's growing belly, asking about doctor's appointments and nursery colors. She'd barely glance at me. "Are you feeling okay, Danielle? You look tired. You should take better care of yourself." My father started making comments about financial responsibility. "Babies are expensive. Elise is going to need help. You're in the best position to provide that."
And I realized what was happening.
They were building a narrative. They were constructing a reality where I was the villain, the cold sister who wouldn't help, and Elise was the victim who needed saving. If you're still with me right now, listening to this, I need you to subscribe. I know that sounds desperate, but here's the truth. It helps the channel grow, unless you don't think stories like this deserve to be heard. Unless you think I should have just stayed quiet and accepted what they did to me. But at least comment your city.
I want to know who's out there.
I want to know people in New York, Texas, California, anywhere, are listening and believing me. Because my own family didn't. The catalyst came on a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when I saw the envelope on the kitchen counter. Official looking. Legal. I opened it. It was a child support petition. Filed by Elise Montgomery, my sister, with supporting documentation from my parents. They were suing me, not Eric.
Me.
For financial support of the child. The claim stated that I had the most stable income and employment history, and that I had a moral and familial obligation to provide for my sister's child. There was a court date, 3 weeks away, and attached was a letter from my father's lawyer explaining that this was in the best interest of the family and that I should do the right thing and agree to terms outside of court. I read it 3 times before my hands started shaking. Elise walked into the kitchen, saw me holding the papers, and had the audacity to look apologetic. "It wasn't my idea," she said softly. "Mom and Dad thought it was the best solution. You make good money, Danielle. And I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," I said, my voice hollow. "You have Eric." She touched her belly, looked away. "Eric isn't in a position to provide right now. You know that. So you sue me? Your sister? We're family," she said, like that explained everything. This is what family does. Eric came downstairs, already defensive. "Don't make this bigger than it is, Danny. Just help out. It's not like you can't afford it." And that's when something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted.
Hardened. Crystallized.
I realized I had been living in their story. I had accepted the role they'd written for me. The stable one. The provider. The one who sacrifices everything without complaint. But I didn't have to stay in that story. I could write my own. So I started gathering evidence. Quietly. Methodically. I went through every text message I'd ever saved. Every email. Every photo. I built a timeline, dates and times and locations. I documented every instance of Elise being at our house when I wasn't home. I pulled credit card statements showing dinners Eric claimed were work events that matched exactly with Elise's social media check-ins. I found messages in old phones, flirtatious, planning, conspiratorial. I talked to our neighbor, Mrs. Langford, who lived across the street. She'd always been kind to me, always waved when I left for work early in the morning. "Mrs. Langford," I asked carefully one afternoon, "did you ever notice anything unusual with people coming and going from my house?" She looked uncomfortable. Then she sighed. "Honey, I didn't want to say anything.
But yes,
your sister was there a lot. When you weren't home. Sometimes she'd arrive right after you left for work and wouldn't leave until just before you got back." "How long?" I asked. "Months," she said quietly. "At least 6 months before you found out about the baby." I asked her if she'd be willing to write a statement. She agreed. I contacted Eric's previous employer and requested copies of his termination paperwork, which showed he'd been fired for cause, not laid off like he'd told me. I found emails where he'd asked Elise for money, where they discussed me like I was an obstacle to work around. I found a voicemail Elise had left on a friend's phone, retrieved from a backup, where she bragged about Finally getting someone who actually appreciates me, and how Danielle is so focused on work she doesn't even notice what's happening in her own house. Every piece of evidence I copied, documented, organized. I barely slept. I stopped talking to them about anything real. I became a ghost in my own home, pleasant and distant, while I built my case. If you haven't subscribed yet, maybe you don't want Danielle to get justice? I'm kidding, kind of. But really, hit subscribe. Or at least comment why you're holding back. Tell me if you think I'm wrong for what I'm about to do. Because I need to know if anyone would have done differently. 3 weeks later, I walked into that courtroom. It was packed. My entire family was there. My mother and father sat behind Elise in a show of solidarity. Eric sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee. She was showing now, visibly pregnant, playing the part of the struggling single mother perfectly. My parents' lawyer stood up and painted me as the successful, childless sister who had resources and should share them with family. He talked about family obligations and moral duty. He presented my salary, my savings, my stable employment history. Miss Montgomery has the means to ensure this child is cared for, he argued. And she has a responsibility to her sister and this family. Elise wiped her eyes with a tissue. My mother looked at me with this expression, part pity, part disappointment, like I was failing some fundamental test of humanity. The judge looked at me. Miss Montgomery, do you have anything to say? I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. Yes, Your Honor. I do. I opened the folder I'd brought. It was thick, hundreds of pages of documentation. I'd like to present evidence that contradicts the narrative being presented today. The lawyer objected immediately. This is a child support hearing, not a... It's directly relevant, I said calmly, because the entire basis of this petition is that I have a unique familial obligation. But I'd like to show the court the actual nature of this family dynamic and how this situation came to be. The judge gestured for me to continue. I laid it out methodically. The timeline of the affair. Text messages between Eric and Elise planning when they could be alone. Credit card receipts. Mrs. Langford's witness statement describing months of secret visits. The voicemail where Elise admitted to the affair with pride. I presented emails from my parents encouraging Elise to spend more time with Eric, to support him while I was working. Messages where my mother coached Elise on how to connect with him emotionally. I showed the court Eric's termination paperwork and financial records proving he'd been living off my income for almost a year. I showed evidence that Elise knew about our financial situation in detail, information I never shared with her, but that Eric clearly had. And then I presented the most damning piece, a text exchange between Elise and my mother, dated 2 weeks before the pregnancy announcement, where they discussed how Danielle will just have to accept it, and how she's always been practical about family obligations, and how she'll come around once the baby is here. They had planned this. They had orchestrated it. This wasn't an accident or a moment of weakness. This was calculated. The courtroom was silent. Elise had gone pale. My mother was staring at me like she didn't recognize me. My father's face was red, his jaw clenched. Eric was looking at his hands. The judge read through the documents carefully. Then he looked up. This petition is denied, he said firmly. Furthermore, I'm deeply troubled by what appears to be an attempt to manipulate the court and financially exploit Miss Montgomery. I'm ordering a review of this filing for potential sanctions against the petitioner and legal counsel. He looked at Elise. Miss Montgomery, the petitioner, you named your sister as a source of financial support while failing to pursue the actual father of your child, who is present in this courtroom and has been living in the same household. This appears to be either fraud or an abusive process. Elise started crying. Real crying this time, not the performed kind. My mother stood up. Your Honor, we didn't understand. Sit down, he said sharply. I'm not finished. He turned to my parents' lawyer. You filed this petition knowing the full circumstances? The lawyer stammered something about information provided by the client and good faith representation. This court doesn't appreciate being used as a weapon in family manipulation, the judge said. Petition denied. Court adjourned. The gavel came down. I stood there while they all turned to look at me. Elise was sobbing. My mother was shaking. My father looked like he wanted to explode. Eric was frozen, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And then my father found his voice. "How could you do this to your own family?" he shouted across the courtroom. "How could you humiliate us like this? We were trying to help." "You were trying to make me pay for their choices," I said quietly. "You were trying to make me the solution to a problem they created." My mother rushed over, grabbing my arm. "Danielle, please. We didn't know the full story. We thought." "You didn't want to know," I said, pulling away. "You wanted me to be who you've always needed me to be. The one who fixes everything. The one who sacrifices. The one who stays quiet." Elise stood up, still crying. "I'm your sister. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at her for a long moment. "It used to mean everything. That's why this hurts so much." And then I walked out. I walked out of that courtroom, out of the building, into the bright afternoon sun. I got in my car and drove away. My phone started ringing immediately. My mother, my father, Eric, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off. That was 3 months ago. I filed for divorce the next week. Eric didn't contest it. He moved in with Elise and my parents, actually. They're all living together now in my parents' house. Apparently, they need each other. My mother has texted me 17 times. The messages started apologetic. "We didn't know the full situation. We never meant for it to go this far. You're still our daughter." But they've gotten more accusatory as time has passed. "You've torn this family apart. Your father is devastated. How can you be so cold?" I haven't responded. My father called from an unknown number last week. Got through before I could block it. He told me I was being selfish, that family is supposed to forgive, that I'm letting pride destroy relationships. I hung up. Elise sent me a long letter, handwritten. It arrived yesterday. In it, she said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, that she was confused and made terrible choices. She said the baby, a girl, was born last month. She said they named her Danielle. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Because here's what I've learned. Some betrayals are too complete to come back from. Some violations are too fundamental. And some families, some people, will always see you as a resource rather than a person. My therapist asked me last week if I feel guilty, if I regret how it ended. And honestly,
No.
I feel sad. I feel grieved. I mourn the family I thought I had, the sister I thought I knew, the husband I thought loved me. But I don't regret exposing the truth. I don't regret refusing to pay for their choices. I don't regret walking away. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I chose my own dignity over their comfort. I chose my truth over their narrative. And that feels like the first honest thing I've done in years. I'm rebuilding now. Slowly. I moved to a new apartment across town. I'm in therapy twice a week. I've started reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with, people who actually see me, who don't need me to be anything other than who I am. I'm learning what it means to have boundaries, to say no, to not apologize for existing in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. And I'm learning that sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't holding everything together. Sometimes it's letting it all fall apart. If you've lived through betrayal like this, if you've been made to feel crazy for seeing what's right in front of you, if you've been told to sacrifice yourself for people who would never do the same for you, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments if you feel safe doing so. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me I'm not crazy for walking away from blood relatives who treated me like a bank account with a heartbeat. And if you made it this far, if you listened to my whole story, please subscribe. Not for me, but for everyone else out there who's been told to stay quiet, to accept less, to be grateful for crumbs of respect from people who should love them unconditionally. Your support means someone else might find this video when they're searching for proof that they're not wrong for wanting more, that they're not selfish for choosing themselves. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I'm Danielle. And for the first time in 32 years, I'm choosing me.